In the late 16th century, Europe was a continent burning with religious conflict, imperial ambitions, and political intrigue. The Protestant Reformation had splintered the Catholic Church's dominance, and with it came decades of wars, persecutions, and shifting alliances. Among the most powerful Catholic monarchs of the era was King Philip II of Spain, ruler of a global empire stretching from South America to the Philippines. Spain was not only the wealthiest European nation, thanks to silver from the Americas, but also the most staunch defender of Catholicism. Philip II saw himself as the divine protector of the Catholic world and viewed Protestant England under Queen Elizabeth I as both a religious and political threat. Queen Elizabeth I had ascended to the English throne in 1558 after the death of her half-sister, Queen Mary I, who had been married to Philip. Mary had restored Catholicism in England and had even aligned the kingdom with Spain, but with Elizabeth's rise, Protestantism once again became the state religion. Elizabeth was excommunicated by Pope Pius V in 1570, and Catholic Europe no longer recognized her legitimacy as a monarch. Meanwhile, she supported Protestant causes across Europe, especially in the Spanish-controlled Netherlands, where rebels were fighting for religious and political freedom. She also gave her blessing to privateers, state-sponsored pirates like Sir Francis Drake, to raid Spanish ships and settlements, further enraging Philip. By the 1580s, Philip had come to the conclusion that Elizabeth needed to be removed and England needed to be brought back into the Catholic fold. He began planning a full-scale invasion. The idea was to assemble a massive fleet, the Spanish Armada, that would sail through the English Channel, connect with the Duke of Parma's army, stationed in the Spanish Netherlands, and then invade southern England. The Armada consisted of around 130 ships and over 30,000 soldiers and sailors. It was the most ambitious naval campaign ever attempted in European history up to that point. The stakes were enormous. A successful invasion would not only overthrow the Protestant regime in England, but could also have ended the Protestant Reformation in Northern Europe. If England fell, Protestant Scotland would have been vulnerable and the Dutch rebellion might have been crushed. France, too, was in the midst of its own religious wars, and a Catholic resurgence led by Spain could have tipped the balance across the entire continent. The English, aware of the threat, prepared for war. Elizabeth's navy, though smaller, was faster and more manoeuvrable. Her commanders, including Sir Francis Drake and Lord Charles Howard, used clever tactics to harass and disrupt the Spanish formation. The English also used fire ships, old vessels set ablaze and sent toward the Armada to scatter the tightly packed Spanish fleet. The weather, too, turned against the Spanish. Storms in the English Channel disrupted their coordination, and once the Armada failed to link up with Parma's forces, they were forced to retreat northward around Scotland and Ireland. During this long and treacherous journey, many ships were wrecked on the rocky coasts, and thousands of sailors died from starvation, disease, and exposure. The failure of the Spanish Armada was a turning point in history. It marked the beginning of the decline of Spanish maritime dominance and the rise of England as a global naval power. The victory boosted national pride in England and strengthened the legitimacy of Elizabeth's reign. It allowed the English to continue supporting Protestant causes in Europe and expand their influence overseas. Within a few decades, England would establish colonies in North America and begin its journey toward building the British Empire. But had things gone differently, had the Armada succeeded, the consequences would have been earth-shattering. Queen Elizabeth likely would have been captured and either executed or imprisoned. A Catholic monarch, perhaps Philip himself or a puppet ruler, would have been installed. The Church of England would have been abolished and Catholicism reinstated as the state religion. Protestant leaders would have faced persecution, exile, or death. English literature, culture, and politics would have evolved under very different influences, perhaps more in line with Spanish and Catholic traditions than with the Renaissance and Enlightenment ideas that later shaped British society. The political landscape of Europe would have changed as well. A Catholic England allied with Spain and possibly with the French Catholic factions could have dominated Northern Europe. The Protestant Netherlands might have fallen, and the balance of power in Europe would have shifted permanently toward Catholic monarchies. The colonization of the America would have been monopolized by Spain, altering the cultural, linguistic, and religious map of the New World. English settlements in North America,
such as those that became the United States, may never have existed, or might have been, Spanish Catholic territories. The ripple effects could extend even further into the modern world, Without a strong Protestant England, the development of parliamentary democracy, the Industrial Revolution, and even the concept of civil liberties might have taken a different form, or been delayed by centuries. The Enlightenment, fueled by English philosophers like John Locke and the scientific progress of Newton and others, might never have flourished in the same way. In this sense, the failure of the Spanish Armada was not just a failed invasion, it was one of history's great turning points. The very identity of the modern West, its politics, its freedoms, its languages, and its religions, hinged on those stormy days in 1588 when fate, fireships, and fierce resistance turned back the might of the Spanish Empire. Sure, here is a long, continuous, and immersive alternate history scenario in English, starting with imagination and flowing without headings, just as you requested. Imagine a world where the storm clouds over the English Channel never arrived, where the Spanish Armada held firm formation, where fireships launched by the English were too few and ineffective, and where the Duke of Parma's troops in the Spanish Netherlands managed to rendezvous smoothly with the fleet. In this alternate timeline, the invasion of England in 1588 was not a disaster, but a triumph. The Spanish galleons filled the horizon of southern England as thousands of seasoned troops landed near Kent. Queen Elizabeth, under political pressure and facing betrayal from secret Catholic sympathisers, was forced to retreat to the north. The English navy, having exhausted its ammunition and morale, scattered after suffering a series of decisive defeats. The Spanish victory was swift and symbolic. London fell within weeks, and with it, the Protestant regime of Elizabeth I crumbled. Captured and publicly humiliated, Elizabeth was either executed or exiled, her fate sealed in silence to avoid martyrdom. Philip II of Spain installed a Catholic monarch favourable to his rule, possibly one of his own bloodline, and declared England restored to the Holy Church. The Church of England was outlawed, Bibles in English were burned in the streets, and Catholic Mass once again echoed through the cathedrals of Canterbury and Westminster. Across the country, Protestant ministers were imprisoned or executed, and a wave of fear silenced dissent. Many intellectuals fled to the Protestant Dutch Republic, or to the few remaining safe havens in Germany and Scandinavia. The English Reformation, which had only taken hold decades earlier, was extinguished. What followed was a cultural shift. Universities were restructured to reflect Catholic doctrine, and English society began to adopt Spanish-influenced art, architecture, and customs. English as a language remained dominant, but it absorbed many Spanish and Latin terms, especially in religious, legal, and academic spheres. The political consequences reverberated far beyond the British Isles. A Catholic England meant the Dutch revolt lost its most important ally. Without English support, the Spanish were able to crush the Dutch rebellion and reassert control over the Low Countries. The Protestant experiment in Northern Europe began to collapse. Denmark and Sweden remained isolated bastions, while the Holy Roman Empire saw renewed Catholic influence. France, still divided in its wars of religion, leaned more heavily toward Catholic unity to remain on Spain's good side, leading to a Europe far more religiously uniform under the Pope's authority. Meanwhile, overseas ambitions took a dramatic turn. English colonization of North America was either halted or conducted under Spanish supervision. Jamestown, Plymouth, and the future 13 colonies never came to be. Instead, Spanish settlements expanded farther north from Florida and New Spain, establishing Catholic missions and military outposts where Protestant pilgrims and entrepreneurs would have gone. The cultural landscape of what we know as the United States became deeply Hispanic and Catholic, with cities named San Miguel, Santa Lucia, and Cristo Rey flourishing where Boston and New York might have stood. Without a free Protestant England, the birth of constitutional monarchy, individual liberties, and representative government was significantly delayed. There was no English Civil War, no Magna Carta in public consciousness, and no glorious revolution. The monarchy remained absolute, with divine right bolstered by Catholic theology. This set back the development of parliamentary democracy across Europe. Philosophers like John Locke, who influenced the American and French revolutions, either never emerged or were suppressed. The Enlightenment was stifled in its infancy, or else it emerged decades later in more secretive, fragmented ways. By the 18th century, in this timeline, Spain and its vast colonial empire, now including both North and South America, remained the dominant global force. England, now a Spanish satellite state, contributed ships, manpower and resources to maintain Spanish supremacy. There was no British Empire, no East India Company, and no naval race with France. The Industrial Revolution, which in our world began in England, might have started elsewhere much later, or perhaps not at all in the same form. Scientific discoveries were vetted through religious councils. Galileo's fate became the norm for scientists who strayed too far from dogma. Innovation slowed under the weight of orthodoxy. In the absence of an independent England, the Napoleonic Wars, the American Revolution, and even the rise of global capitalism looked radically different. The United States, if it existed at all, would have been a Catholic monarchy, loyal to Spain, or perhaps its own European-born elite. There would be no Declaration of Independence, no constitution based on Enlightenment values, and no modern model for democracy to inspire other nations. The world map by the 19th century would have been largely dominated by a Latin Catholic sphere stretching from South America to Canada, across Africa and into Asia, centered on Madrid and Rome, rather than London or Washington. Even language and culture would shift. The English language might have been absorbed or heavily influenced by Spanish to the point of becoming unrecognizable to modern ears. Shakespeare's works, if preserved at all, would be translated and censored for religious orthodoxy. Literature, music, and art would reflect more Baroque Catholic themes than the rebellious, individualistic tones of Protestant England. The Renaissance spirit of inquiry and the scientific method would have faced much stricter control, possibly postponing major medical and technological advancements. In short, the world as we know it, a world shaped by democratic ideals, technological innovation, English-speaking nations, and a balance between faith and reason, would never have emerged in the same way. All of it would have hinged on a single moment, the failure of England to resist the Spanish Armada. History would have been rewritten by the victors, and the very concept of modern liberty might have been nothing more than a suppressed idea whispered in the corners of forgotten monasteries.